Welcome back to Films Recapped. Today I will show you an action, thriller film from 2022, called Ambulance. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and enjoy. Beginning the film in Los Angeles, Will James Sharp, a war veteran, has been pleading on the phone with someone at the insurance firm. He makes numerous tries, but only gets people who hang up on him. When the call is over, he turns to find his wife carrying their son. He tells his wife a lie and says they have insurance to pay for Amy's medical expenses. He then makes an excuse to go outside for a moment. When Amy informs her husband that a call came in from a blocked number, Will reassures her that it wasn't his brother Danny. He tells his wife to activate the alarm when he leaves, and she follows his instructions. Will phones Danny to let him know he's on his way to visit him as he climbs into his Jeep. A car collision is reported to an EMT team in the meantime. Cam, one of the first responders, aids a 9-year-old girl who was injured in the collision. After 12 minutes, she and her new companion, Scott, are able to get the girl to the hospital. Scott is astounded by the exhilaration he experiences for the first time after transporting the girl safely to the hospital. Cam dismisses this and says she's hungry. They then proceed to an enchilada restaurant. While they are eating, Scott tells Cam that after doing some research, he has discovered that even though Cam is an excellent EMT, nobody wants to work with her. Will then makes his way to Danny's house to look for him. Castro, one of Danny's men, informs him that his employer is in the back. When the gates open, a large number of luxurious cars are parked there. When Will is offered a cup of coffee by Danny, he admits that he is in dire need of his brother's assistance. Will discovers that their adoptive brother, a convicted felon throughout his whole life, is sporting their late father's watch. Danny explains to him that when he was cleaning out their house, Will wasn't present. Then, after showing Will images of them as children, they start to look back on the past. Then he poses a serious question. How much does he require? In order to pay for his wife Amy's surgery, Will informs his brother that he needs $231,000. However, Will's brother persuades him to take part in a $32 million bank heist instead. Will next runs into a few of Danny's men who are involved in the scheme. When Danny explains to the men that Will is his brother, Will departs when the men ask him who he is. Will is apprehensive at first, but once Danny reiterates that he is doing this for Amy, he agrees. Officer Zach Parker and his colleague, Officer Mark, are traveling around the city in another area of the city chatting about Zach and his crush on a bank teller. When Mark notices that his partner hasn't asked the teller out yet, he makes the decision to go back to the bank and wait for Zach to do so. Later, while driving to La Federal Bank, Danny and his crew begin to prepare for the heist. They continue to ride in the elevator when it is stopped by an Asian woman. When Zach discovers that the bank is closed, he gets ready to ask the teller out while outside. Danny approaches the door while posing as a bank manager and informs the policeman that they are closed due to a necessary inspection. Zach requests permission to complete a task quickly since he is running behind schedule just as Danny is about to shut the door. Despite being completely uninformed of the heist, Danny takes the officer inside. When Danny mispronounces his staff's last name, Officer Zach realizes the problem and the scheme almost works. Danny then kidnaps Zach and demands that he comply with his demands in order to ensure everyone's safety. The car they are traveling in breaks down in front of the bank, and Mark approaches and assists in fixing it as their driver Randazzo circles the hotel. Mark observes that his partner is taking too long just before the burglars are about to depart. When the police discover Zach is being held hostage, he orders the people outside the bank to quiet down. A gunfight then breaks out between an individual involved in the crime and Officer Mark. Will and Danny flee to the garage as the LAPD's Special Investigation Section arrives and eliminates the remaining team members. Zach makes an attempt to flee, and during a struggle with Danny, Will inadvertently shoots him. Will is reluctant to leave the cop he just shot, but Danny persuades him to do so because they must flee immediately. The brothers try to leave through the building's back but discover that it is surrounded by police, so they leave Zach behind to die. When Mark discovers Zach shot, he summons an ambulance to the parking structure. After receiving the call, Cam and Scott go to the officer's location. Zach is successfully brought inside for protection. The brothers attempt to shoot their way out of the bank as this is going on. They then take over the ambulance, which is Cam on board tending to Zach's wounds. When Mark discovers Scott hurt in the parking lot, he understands that the brothers have just taken over the ambulance, which contains his partner. CIS Captain Monroe comes on the scene with his dog and orders the helicopters to launch a pursuit of the car. Cam uses a fire extinguisher in a last-ditch attempt to flee after a chase that sends them into an alleyway. Danny points a gun at her as she tries to go, and when Zach begins to collapse, she decides to stay. Cam asks Danny for assistance while she uses a defibrillator while they are being pursued. They manage to escape the pursuit of 2 police cruisers after coming to a dead end. Danny then makes a call to Poppy, one of his father's criminal friends, asking for assistance in avoiding capture in exchange for $8 million. Zach is bleeding out excessively, and Cam informs the brothers that they need a blood supply. Will tells her that he is a universal donor, and despite his uncertainty and fury, she persuades him to give some of his blood to Zach. Later, Kem intervenes to prevent Danny from shooting Mark, who has been pursuing them. Danny threatens to throw Kem off the ambulance as he knocks her to the ground. When it is revealed that Monroe's dog is in Mark's police car, the authorities are compelled to flee. Anson Clark, an FBI agent and Danny's former friend, is later introduced to Monroe and assigned to the investigation. Kem finds out that the police officer's spleen has ruptured after being shot twice as Zach starts to bleed out. Danny, who had already requested Cam's phone, looks through her contacts before calling Cam's ex-boyfriend Colin to help her through the procedure. To help Cam, Colin makes video calls with certain physicians. Will swaps places with Danny, who is now driving. Zach is the target of an operation being performed by Cam with Will's assistance. They lose touch with Colin and his colleagues when the laptop's battery dies mid-operation. But despite her inexperience, Cam manages to save Zach in the end. Later, Cam unsuccessfully tries to persuade Will to stop Danny. Monroe continues the procedure and is ready to snipe Will and Danny without negotiating for Cam's life because he is unaware that the surgery was successful and believes they have lost Zach. Monroe is persuaded by Clark that because the EMT is still in the ambulance, they may still bargain. The FBI agent phones Cam and advises her to warn her to get as low as possible after realizing that Zach still has his phone with him. Cam notes that Zach is still alive because he is concerned. Cam warns Will and Danny about the snipers in an effort to spare Zach's life. Danny, who has had enough of Cam, decides to shoot her, but Will stops him, setting to a battle between the brothers over their position that results in them punching each other as the ambulance drives on. Cam summons Monroe, and she learns Will's name from him. Clark gives them a call and talks to Will. Clark instructs Cam to start working with Will because he knows he is the weakest link. Later, Will answers a call from Amy and switches her to speaker. Cam learns via listening to their chat that Will isn't actually a nasty man. The brothers later partially make amends and listen to music together to diffuse the tension after Danny phones Roberto, Poppy's son. They then arrive at the Los Angeles River. As Danny fires at the ambulance, helicopters pursue it. Then, Will and Danny drive in the opposing lane of the highway, resulting in numerous collisions. The brothers' meeting place with Castro, Roberto, and several of Poppy's men is where the ambulance makes a halt. Castro is given the task of painting the ambulance by Danny. After that, Danny gives Castro the order to drive an unoccupied ambulance as they pursue from behind in a green-painted camouflaged ambulance. Upon Poppy's instruction, Roberto fills an empty ambulance with C4 explosives and drives it toward the police, whereupon he opens fire with machine guns on various vehicles, killing Monroe in the process. After being injured by the explosion, Mark awakens to see Roberto fleeing. After a fight, he kills Roberto, which makes Poppy furious and upset after watching it on the news. Later, Will and Danny find their way to Poppy's covert location. Poppy insists that the brothers leave Zach and Cam with them to handle. Will, however, is uncooperative and joins Danny in killing Poppy and his group. Using Zach's rifle during the commotion, Cam unintentionally shoots Will. When Cam is questioned about the shooter by Danny after learning that Will had been shot, Cam lied and said she was unaware. Cam tries to help Will, who manages to smuggle some cash onto Cam's luggage and tells her to give it to Amy later, as Danny is driving. Zach's gun is found by Danny as he rides in the ambulance to the hospital. When Cam admits that she was the one who shot Will, he becomes furious. Before approaching the authorities, Danny makes a live television murder threat against Cam. As the doors open, Will, who has no other option, shoots Danny in the back. Will receives apologies from Danny before he passes away from his wounds. Will is gravely hurt when the police arrive, but Cam tells Mark that Will actually saved his partner's life. After that, they bring him into the hospital for an operation. Cam covertly gives Amy some of the money from the theft to pay for her operation. Meanwhile, Zach discloses that Will was the one who saved his life when he is questioned by the police about his injuries. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.